Chapter 23. When Jabari arrived at DeWitt's home to collect Isika and Ben, the house was silent. He stood in the doorway for a moment, peering in. Dusk was falling outside, but warm lamps shone in the room already, and he could make out the shapes of his 3 fellow travelers sleeping on cushions in the living space. He smiled. "Teru, Auntie," he called. She came quickly, frowning at him. "They're sleeping. You'll wake them," she scolded. "We have to wake them," he said. "Dinner at the palace." "Surely you can let them sleep." He smiled. "Sorry, they can sleep after the incredible feast that's been put together for them." Teru made a noise that sounded strikingly like the clicking and scolding of the Othra, and Jabari ducked. She shook her head as she gestured for him to come in, bustled over to the sleeping kids, and bent over one of them. "It's time to go, Isika," she said. "Jabari is here to get you." Isika sat up, looking sleepy, disoriented, and slightly grumpy. It was cute. Jabari grinned at her. She narrowed her eyes at him. "Come on," he said. "I'm waiting. Let's go, sleepyheads." Isika stood slowly and brushed at her clothes. She looked radiant, brand new after such a long journey, her hair tied back in a way that emphasized the lovely lines of her face. For a moment, Jabari had to look away to catch his breath. He shook the feeling away, looking down at his own clothes. He had bathed and changed as well, and he now wore a white shirt that crossed diagonally over his chest, and long black pants of stiff cloth. The palace barber had even visited, frowning at the state of his hair. Jabari was clean and trimmed and pressed, just like Isika. He stood a little taller. Isika tried to wake Iba, but the little girl muttered, frowned, and rolled over, refusing to get up. Teru's face was so fierce that Jabari finally told Isika to leave her to sleep. Benyim stood and clasped hands with Jabari. He looked good as well, dressed in dark pants and a bright green shirt. His hair was dark and curly against his head. "We clean up well," Jabari said. "If I hadn't seen just how many twigs you can get stuck in your hair, Benyim, I might even be intimidated." Ben stretched and grinned. He took his sister's arm and they walked to the doorway together. "Don't keep them out late," Teru said sternly. "I'll try," Jabari said, "but they're animals at a party." Teru swiped at him, but he evaded her and ducked out the doorway into the dusky evening. He took another look at the siblings as they left the house. He shook his head. "You look as though you'd always lived here," he said, striding down the path so they had to walk quickly to keep up. "Who on earth are you? I'd love to know." "I'd love to know for once where we're going," Isika grumbled, and he slowed down to look at her. "Oh, that. There's been a change of plans," Jabari said. "My father has invited us all to eat at the palace, so we're meeting Arya there." Isika stared at him. "Do you really think the palace is a good place to talk with our sister for the first time in 4 years? "You already talked to her for the first time," Jabari said, "in front of 100 strangers. But yes, I think it'll be okay. They'll give you a small table, curtained and out of the way. You'll have privacy to talk." He leaned closer. "I wrangled that for you with my palace connections." "Great," Isika said. She was scowling at the ground. "What?" Jabari asked, elbowing her. She turned the scowl on him, then it disappeared suddenly. "Can you—" she hesitated. "Can you come with us? You know Arya. She'll feel better if you are there." Jabari looked at her and caught a little glimpse of how hard this day had been. "Sure," he said, and he slackened his pace so they could walk in a more leisurely way. He reached out to pat her arm and she shrugged him away. Ben chuckled. "Just because she asked you for help doesn't mean that she wants to need your help," he said, and Jabari laughed under his breath. A smile flitted over Isika's face as well, so quickly Jabari almost missed seeing it. They reached the palace before long, just as it was truly becoming dark. The grand building was brilliant at night, with lamps in the corners chasing the darkness away, and lanterns flanking the steps into the entryway. Candles lined the wall alcoves and the stairway railings, casting flickering light onto the carved and painted walls. They walked to the dining hall, a vast room with 20 tables piled with food in the center. Cushions and low tables were placed along the walls, and people stood and conversed with one another, glasses in their hands, or sat on the cushions, eating and talking. A servant approached and held out a tray of glasses filled with juice that sparkled red in the light. Jabari took 2 and handed one to Benyim and one to Isika, and then took one for himself. He took a sip of the fermented berry tea. It was sweet, sour, and bubbly, and he finished the glass in one long drink. "What is this?" Ben asked. "Tea made from vera berries, and fermented with the theto mushroom," he told them. They looked back at him blankly. "Never mind, it's just a bubbly drink." They had the look of stunned people. Jabari took another look at the room. Over 100 men, women, and in some cases children walked around or sat on cushions. In the corner, musicians played flute and drum, and the room rang with light and sound from 200 lamps and voices and laughter that bounced off the stone walls. Jabari could imagine that it was ever so slightly intimidating if one had never been to court before. He turned back to Isika and Benyim. "They're all just friends, sort of," he said. "But come this way and we'll find Arya in your quiet corner." He led them through the room, weaving between people in gorgeous clothes, to greet his parents and the other elders. "Welcome," his mother said, Kara by her side. "Congratulations on your reunion. We have not seen one before, and we knew we had to invite you here to observe." Jabari flinched. He loved his mom, but she could be so courtly. He kissed her cheek and rounded his eyes at Isika. She smiled and bowed her head, then darted a quick glance at Jabari's mother and Kara. Jabari saw that they were dressed in robes covered in glittering stones. The whole room sparkled. Jabari took Isika's elbow and continued walking through the room with Ben walking on her other side. Jabari nodded and greeted people he knew along the way. He didn't love being at the palace the way he loved being in the wild, seeking with Gavi, but he had grown up here and it was as easy as breathing to him. Life in the palace was like a game. He stopped near the back of the room and looked around for Arya. Beside him, Isika rubbed at her temples and closed her eyes. There was Arya. She was only half a head shorter than Isika, but she looked childlike without her bow and quiver. Her many braids were coiled around her head, and she wore a deep orange tunic. "There you are, little sister," Jabari said, using the familiar way of addressing younger girls in Maween. "Greetings, Jabari," Arya said, bowing her head slightly. Her voice was soft and hoarse. She was still such a little girl in many ways, though she was in the place between 2 ages, neither young nor old. He felt sympathy for her and pity for the others, so he straightened and took charge. "Reunions go better when we fill our bellies," he said. "I think we should eat." They sat in an alcove in the corner, beside one of the low tables. Jabari sank into the cushions, taking a sip of another drink, this one a spiced tea. The spices warmed his stomach. A servant brought platters of food with flatbread and spicy meat, a plate of tomatoes, and a bowl of fruit. He did love the food in the palace. They ate, and Jabari watched Ben and Isika as they chewed slowly to savor the food, leaning toward each other to comment on what they were tasting. "Good?" he asked. "I've never tasted anything like it," Isika said. "That doesn't tell me whether it's good or not," he laughed. "It's amazing," she said, narrowing her eyes at him. "But you don't need me to tell you that." Arya wasn't eating much or meeting anyone's eyes. She cleared her throat after a while. "So we have a brother named Kital?" she asked. Isika nodded, her face immediately stricken. The lamplight reflected in her eyes, which were very serious. "And you followed him?" Arya asked. "Yes, but he isn't here." Arya looked at Jabari. "The rescuers may have been attacked," he said. his words soft. "We leave tomorrow to find him." Arya sat up straighter. "I want to go too." "Arya," Jabari said, his voice a warning, "it's not a good idea. You have your studies, and you're not ready for seeking." "I want to go. He's my brother too," Arya said again. She held her head high when she said it, and her eyes were like flint. Jabari's shoulders sagged. These stubborn people. He could see Arya's resemblance to Isika now. It would be a journey filled with children then, because Jabari knew that Ivram wouldn't deny Arya the right to find her brother. He shrugged. "Take it up with Ivram," he said, and both Ben and Isika looked at him with wide eyes. He put his hands out, palms up. "I'm not in charge of this journey," he said. "I can't tell her whether she can come or not." Isika looked like she was going to argue, but which way Jabari didn't know. She didn't say anything, though, and he watched her hands clench and unclench around the fabric in her lap a few times before she straightened them and smoothed her crumpled tunic. They ate in silence for a while. Then Arya had another question. "How is our mother?" Isika gasped, and Ben looked down at the ground. Jabari didn't know where to look. This was a lot harder than he had thought it would be. Isika leaned forward, getting closer to her sister. Jabari saw the physical resemblance between them when they were near each other, something about their forehead and their eyes. Arya was lovelier, but Isika looked stronger and wilder, as though she belonged in a forest. Arya's eyes were guarded as Isika looked into them. Jabari felt horrible as he understood that Arya didn't like her sister, and maybe even felt hatred for her. Arya was the sibling who had been cast away. "She died, Arya," Isika said, and Arya's guard slipped. Tears filled her eyes, and she lifted a hand to her face, sobbing. Isika reached across the table and caught her other hand, holding it tightly. "After you were given over, she never recovered. She died 2 weeks later." Arya took deep breaths and blinked tears out of her eyes, dashing them away with the back of her hand. "Who took care of Kital?" she asked. "Father?" "No," Isika said. "I did." Arya had been looking at her plate, but at that she glanced up at her sister, measuring. Jabari saw that she was really looking at Isika, her eyes still wet, taking in what Isika's life had been, while Arya had been in Moween, learning new ways, gaining a new family who took care of her. "It was hard," Isika said. "I missed you so much. I missed our mother so much. I felt like I would die. But I had to take care of Kital all day and all night when he couldn't sleep. Father would yell at me to make him quiet, and sometimes I couldn't, and I had to walk the grounds with the street dogs." She glanced at Benaim. "But I wouldn't change it, wouldn't give him to someone else. He was my baby." Arya watched her with a serious look on her face, then stood abruptly. "I need to go. I'll see you in the morning." She walked away, paused, then turned back to them. "What will you do?" Her eyes were accusing. "When you find him, will you go home?" "Back to father?" Isika asked. "What do you mean?" "No," Ben said. "We're staying here." "You understand that we can't go back, right?" Isika asked Arya. The younger girl towered over the three of them on their cushions. Jabari nodded. "The Poisonlanders would send them away again, little sister, or worse." Arya gave one short nod, then left, slipping through the crowd in the great room, a brief blur of orange, and Jabari didn't see her anymore. When he looked at Isika, he saw tears in her eyes, and he looked back down at his food, not hungry anymore. They walked back through the great hall on their way out. Isika and Ben were drooping, and Jabari felt half dead, ready for bed and sleep. He tried not to think about the fact that they would be leaving again at first light. As much as he loved seeking, he wouldn't mind a few more days of rest. Gavi caught up to them in the hall. "How did it go with Arya?" he asked. Jabari waved his hand in a way that meant just okay, and Gavi nodded. "Where were you?" Jabari asked. "With our parents, Yab. Where do you think? Is Mother fretting about us leaving tomorrow?" Again, what do you think? Better you than me. You've always been better at taking the mother guilt. Gavi stuck a finger in Jabari's ribs, and Jabari shoved back, knocking him into Ben, who laughed and pushed Gavi away. It turned into a bit of a wrestling match there in the palace hall, until Isika's voice broke through. Ben! She called, her voice high and urgent. She had stopped somewhere behind them and was standing still, eyes riveted to one of the many murals that lined the halls of the palace. There were scenes of deer and birds and ships on seas. But Isika stood before the large portrait at the base of the tall staircase. She stood with her hand covering her mouth, and as they hurried back, she turned and stared at Jabari with frantic eyes. "Who is this?" she asked. Evram walked toward them from the dining hall, where the feast was still in full swing. Jabari met the elder's eyes, then turned to face the portrait Isika was staring at. Jabari knew the painting as well as he knew his own face. He had seen it all his life. It was the image of a tall, thin woman with skin as black as night, her eyes like stars in the dark beauty of her face. An Othra sat on her shoulder, and her hand rested on the head of a tall, deer-like creature standing beside her. She wore impressive robes in the painting, flowing like water shot through with every color in the rainbow. But it was her face that Isika stared at. "She was our queen," Jabari said, his voice soft. Evram reached them, his silverwood staff in hand, shining blue in the dim light of the corridor. "This was painted just before Queen Azaria was taken from us," Evram said. "Why? What is the matter, child?" Isika was shaking. "For a moment I thought it was my mother. She has the very same face. Here," she pointed at her own brow, "and here." She put her hands over the lower half of her face. "Do you see, Ben? She looks like mother." Her words ended in a sob, and Evram's staff flashed white in the dim hallway, nearly blinding Jabari. Benaim nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the painting. Jabari and Gavi stood staring at the two of them. Then Jabari cocked an eyebrow at Evram. "Uncle?" he said. Evram heaved a deep sigh. "I think it's possible," he said, "and even likely, that you are the grandchildren of our lost queen." His staff glowed bright white, energy crackling off of it. Jabari had known the words that would come from Evram's mouth, and he heard them now with a sinking in his stomach, as though they had been written down many years before and handed to him here, to read at last, to know as truth. He shook his head. He had been searching for the queen for many years, and it couldn't be that Isika was the queen's grandchild. Isika wasn't right at all. Did it mean that the lost queen of the Mawil was dead? Jabari heard the wings of the Othra as they drew near, and then he was shocked, because he could hear Isika's voice in his head as she called to them. "Help me," she said, without speaking aloud. "Don't be distressed, child," Ifir answered, and the words echoed in Jabari's mind. "We're here.